welcome to the At Sea Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Mcroberts. Here at and with this podcast, I do my best to help you navigate the waters at the intersection of art and religion and leadership, and I normally do so by taking your questions, usually from Instagram, and I answer them there, but then build a podcast of sorts around what you are navigating. This week, I've got questions that actually use the word navigate, so it seems like having an effect. I'm actually getting through one question about AI, a question about religion, and then actually wanted to tack on a little bit of a kind of a personal note about some things I'm paying attention to and noticing. Let's dive into your questions. This person writes in and says, how do I navigate conversations about AI use with those who use it regularly, not just artistically, but also and still at work? Love that we keep having this. First of all, let's keep having the conversation, because as things move along, one of the grand, I'll use this word a bit here, one of the grand narratives we're getting from the pro-AI world is to just not question it. It's just coming. It's inevitable, like Thanos. And the more we ask questions about navigating, the more we'll probably kind of unearth better answers. So this is the best wisdom I have for the time being. And the one is that the conversation we're having about AI has less to do with function. So you mentioned here, this person uses it not just artistically, but at work and at their job. Functionally, if we're having the conversation about function, like, sure, yeah, we've seen that the use of AI tools can streamline certain processes and make things a lot faster. We've seen an acceleration of lab results, in the world of science. But the question I'm asking, and I think a lot of us are feeling in our bones, has to do with like the narrative underneath those results. In other words, like, I think I believe and feel that the conversation about AI use is a narrative conversation, that we have a narrative problem. That, like, sure, like getting things done faster and getting more things done, that all these things are, the idea that all these things are better, like, that's couched in a certain narrative in which, like, achievement and accomplishment are king. That getting more done is better. That comes from a narrative understanding of what human life is about. Like, what is life about? Well, in life, according to the value system of artificial intelligence and those who are pushing it, that life is better if you achieve more. That's a narrative. That's a story. That doing more with the time you have, accomplishing more, is better. That's a story. That's a narrative thing. How we achieve our goals in that same narrative matters less than achieving them. That's a narrative issue. So how do you navigate this? One is have compassion for those who are swept up in that narrative, either because they have really come to believe that. Because if you're in a position in your life in which you believe that accomplishing more at the cost of your own health, if you're living in that place, you've been caught up by a narrative that doesn't have your best interest in mind. So if you're talking with a friend who really buys that narrative, they've been caught up by a narrative that doesn't have their best interest in mind, and probably maybe by entities that don't have their best interest in mind. So if at work they're using AI and their workplace is pushing the use of AI, part of what that workplace might be communicating is a value system in which, like, they are only as good as or as valuable as the work they produce. A work environment in which you are only valuable insofar as you produce things, like, that's where a lot of us work. But that's also why so many of us are living with things like depression, is because the work environments in which we are functioning have been pushing that narrative. The AI story, at least the way AI pushes it, is an extension of that same thing. That the worth of your life is predicated upon your achievements and your productivity. And if that's true, then we can force this tool on you because it's going to help us achieve more through you. The narrative the alternative narrative I am proposing, and many of us are proposing, is one in which getting fewer things done is of value. That disappointment is of value, that falling down is of value, that failure is of value. And the result of which is that my value as a human being is established by sheer nature of my existence and is not proven by my accomplishment. I don't have to justify the breath I breathe, the air I breathe. I don't have to justify my existence on a planet, and my life is not enriched by my accomplishment. That the work of my life actually flows from a place of peace, as opposed to peace being something I get to have once I've achieved all the things that the machine has told me the machine has told me I have to achieve. Things like peace and wholeness should not be rewards for work. Work should be a thing that flows from a place of peace and wholeness. That is an alternative narrative. And when we have alternative narratives, having compassion for folks who are caught up by that narrative is the first step. But bigger than all of that is recognizing that, like, on the basis of functionality, we can't really have that conversation. Because if they're achieving what they want to achieve according to that system of value, then, like, okay, you're getting done what you want to get done. At the cost, I would suggest, from an alternative narrative, at the cost of your soul. Another question I got using the word navigate. Again, I'm very pleased to be having that kind of impact on you. Says, how do I navigate religion when how do I navigate religion being destructive to my life, but my relationship with God is strong? How do I navigate religion being destructive to my life, but my relationship with God is strong? There's so much here, and I'm going to do my best to be respectful. But this screams of a really, this screams to me of a really problematic systemic issue, and then kind of like a personal philosophical issue. So personally, philosophically, this is maybe all of us on some level on a religious journey. We do have a tendency to separate the spiritual part of our lives from the rest of our lives. That, like, our religious practice and our spirituality is like an aspect of our lives over here, and then there's my social life and my financial life and maybe my emotional life and then my private life. It's not just religious folks who do this. I think it's just like it's a human tendency. We tend to divide our lives up a little bit, and then when we get religious, religion becomes this kind of like facet of our lives, and then we can spend a bunch of time trying to get our religious stuff online, and then it feels like it comes at the cost of everything else. Dividing our lives up in general is, I would suggest, an irreligious and like unspiritual thing to do. I think of spirituality as something far more comprehensive. I think of it like this. So Abraham Kuyper writes, "There's not one square inch in the whole domain of human experience over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry mine." There's not one square inch in the whole domain of human experience over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry mine. But every square inch of my life is part of it, like is of concern and has the attention of the divine. The uno reverse of that, from a religious perspective, is that there isn't a square inch of my life that I will consider unspiritual. My social life is a spiritual matter. My financial life is a spiritual matter. The whole of my life is a religious experience. If my religion and my spiritual practices don't highlight my entire life, I think I'm missing the point. And I think I'm going to miss out on life and the goodness of what deep and good spiritual practice can do. Which is to say that the idea that, like, my relationship with God is online and everything else is bad. I have so many questions about how that works out. And without knowing your specifics, I'm not going to make a judgment call. I'll just kind of end the advice at that, like, I think you may be misreading what spirituality is about. And I'd love to help you through that. If you want to message me and we can talk through it. Here's a concern I have. These questions tend to come up when people are caught up in more cultic spaces. And in those cultic spaces, we're pitched this, how do I want to say this? In these cultic spaces, we tend to conflate God and a connection to God with the machinery that grants us access to God. So what cultic spaces will do, what cultic entities will do, is tell you that they can grant you access to God. That if you belong to us, we can get you connected with God. Those guys over there can't do it. We can. We can help you connect with God. Gurus will do this. That everyone else has been has been terribly wrong. I'm the one that's going to show you how to connect with God. That's cultic behavior. And one of the signs of being caught up in cultic culture is this just is a life that sounds a little bit like yours. I have friends who have been caught up in cultic spaces, and they found themselves isolated from their friends and their family. And I'm not talking about like they no longer hung out with their drug addicted, terrible friends. They were disconnected from everyone. That they didn't see their family much anymore. They had good friends that they didn't see anymore. They ended up being isolated. They forewent job opportunities that would displace them from the life that they had, which would mean they would have to change churches. They over tithed, if there's a thing like that. They tithed they gave so much to the entity that they overextended themselves in terms of, their giving to this place, and they really actually put themselves in financial bind. These facets of their whole life weren't enlivened, weren't enriched. They actually kind of got eroded because their life was getting sucked into this entity that was selling them access to God. This to me sounds like that. And I don't know if that's where that's coming from. What I will say is those are the stories I hear from folks who get caught up in cultic spaces. In fact, you might be in a cult if your life in general is in disarray, but you feel connected to God. The way I understand good religion and the fruits of good religion, the way Jesus teaches it, he says, whoever drinks of the water I give him will become a spring of life. That if from you comes a life that actually enriches your friendships, that actually enriches your workplace, that actually enriches the whole of your life, that your life is not diminished because you're connected to God. The whole of your life is enriched because you're connected to God, and it's flowing from inside of you. You are a generative being in your life. I think those are the fruits of good religion and good spirituality. Those are different metrics. So I worry at questions like this. You might be caught up in a cult. You can get out. And if you need help, feel free to message me and let's talk about what's going on. The last piece I wanted to offer, there were a couple other questions that I answered at Instagram that were really fun and interesting. But the last piece I want to get into is I've been listening to all day the new Phoebe Bridgers record. I've been a fan of hers since I ran into her at the Festival of Faith and Music many, many years ago. And this new record is indicative of her work. And it struck me today while I was listening through, maybe 6 or 7 times today. One of the reasons I love her work so much is because she does something that I really value in pop artists. She's a pop artist. Is she meets me as a listener in familiar places. That there are sounds, there's lyrical structure, there are tones that that sounds like Phoebe. But she doesn't just stay there. Maybe the way to say this is she asks something of me as a listener, that I can meet her in this record and she can meet me with this record in familiar places, but also invites me to go a little bit deeper, let's go a little bit further. I shouldn't say there are few. The better artists in the world have this wonderful way of inviting, and not demanding, of inviting and challenging us to go a little bit beyond where we were when we showed up to the record. This goes back to, I think it was maybe last week's podcast about directors like the one who did the Odyssey and the Batman, Christopher Nolan, that there's always a little bit of a challenge, that this is a beautiful thing that you feel like there's an affinity to, and there are aspects of this work that are challenging you to rethink some things and move beyond yourself a little bit. Great artists do that, and this record by Phoebe Bridgers is doing that for me. Not culturally per se. There's nothing culturally particularly challenging about it, but sonically, lyrically, musically, I'm being met in places that are familiar and comfortable, and then I'm being led to places that ask a little bit more of me. When you make your work with your voice, coming from the deeper parts of you, that's how people actually receive it. Because there are aspects of you that are going to be uncomfortable for your friends and your neighbors and your family. And when you put yourself more broadly, more openly on the table, you are familiar to some degree. And you are unfamiliar in ways that like challenge the people around you to love you and to be loved by you. Part of how we know love is that love will meet you where you are, but never leave you there. We say this about God. We say this about good friendships. I think great art does the same thing. And this Phoebe Bridgers record is doing that for me. Check it out. Okay, so thank you for joining me on this episode of the @Sea Podcast. If you'd like to submit a question, visit me on Instagram. We do it once a week, or you can always just kind of message me. And if you're looking to navigate your own life in religion, in leadership, or in art, and you're looking for someone to help you through some specifically weird waters, you can go to justinmcroberts.com and book a session, and we'll see what I can do to help. Until next time.